Hello, this is Dave Hurwitz at ClassicsToday.com, here to talk to you about Ravel's Mother Goose Ballet, Ma Mère Loi. Now, as some of you may know, this piece exists both as a full-length ballet, which isn't so full-length, it's less than half an hour, and as a suite, which was arranged from the piano suite, which exists also in two versions. The issue with the full-length ballet, it's one of Ravel's most magical scores. Absolutely wonderful, and that's the one I really want to talk about the most. It presents a couple of problems that very few performances have solved successfully. I have 5 of them here that we're going to go through, but first I want to tell you what those problems are. The first is one that's near and dear to my heart. It's a tam-tam problem. It's in the central movement, Laidronette, Impératrice des Pagodes. That's the ugly little empress of the pagodas. The central climax involves 2 whacks on the tam-tam, one forte, another mezzo forte, and then some soft ones after that. And it's really a problem because the orchestra itself is rather small. It's a chamber orchestra, and if you're going to really whack a tam-tam forte, you don't have a lot of time for the actual instrument to speak, for it to make its sound, and then get out of the way for the rest of the orchestra. So what's happening in Laidronette is you have bum, 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 bong, da, 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 da. It's literally a couple seconds. The result of this is that in most performances, Ravel's dynamics are completely ignored because a standard orchestral tam-tam speaks for far too long. And so what happens is that conductors tend to ignore the dynamics entirely. They make it very quiet from the beginning, so you either don't hear it or you hear it very briefly, and it doesn't cover the orchestra. Now I'm going to show you what I actually mean because I happen to have a couple of exemplars here. So please bear with me as I get up. This here behind me is your slightly larger than average standard orchestral tam-tam from Wuhan, actually, the Wuhan region of China, which is where the best ones are still made. Now, if you're playing this piece and you whack it forte, you know, bum, 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 bum. As you can clearly hear, it's only going to be starting to really go by the time you're supposed to hit it the second time, and it's going to completely drown out the rest of the orchestra. Now, I actually had this little number here custom made for this piece because it was driving me crazy whenever I performed it that I couldn't get the sound right. You know, I mean, the size of the instrument is critically important because this is a small, thin tam-tam, which means you can play it loudly, but it won't drown out the rest of the orchestra, and it won't spread forever. So you have bum, 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 bum. You see? So it's entirely possible, but it makes me absolutely crazy that in most performances, the conductor or the percussionist don't bother to take the time to find the appropriate instrument. And major orchestras, big orchestras, they have dozens of these things sitting around in their basement. You know, they acquire instruments over time and they belong to the orchestra, and you have to try out different ones and find the best one. Now, most performances, that's just one of those details that I listen for because I'm a percussionist, and so, you know, I care. And I also think it adds tremendously to the character of the piece. I don't think you want a dark, heavy instrument in this piece. It's toy music, you know, it's fantasy. And so you should have something that sounds sort of very Chinese and very Asian. And also in Ravel's day, the instruments that most French orchestras had tended to be light and splashy sounding, not dark and heavy, which is what most orchestras today use. So that was one issue. The other issue occurs at the very end in the fairy garden, the last piece. Now, I know we're talking about the complete ballet and not the suite, but there is one version of the suite that has the most glorious, gorgeous fairy garden in the history of recorded sound, and that's Giulini's with the Concertgebouw on Sony. He always had a special feeling for that piece for some reason, and for its pulse. And even as he got older and slower, he managed to maintain the tempo in that piece above all. It had some sort of special meaning for him, I'm sure. And that performance is so beautiful that if you can find it, that's Giulini with the Concertgebouw on Sony, you should seek it out just to listen to the Fairy Garden. There's nothing like it on disc. But as far as recordings of the complete ballet go, at the end of the Fairy Garden, Ravel writes a series of glissandos for the harp. You know, the orchestra is just going bum, 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 and the harp's going boom, bang, bloom, bing, you know, like this, you know, all up and down. Now, you're supposed to hear this because in the piano versions, he also writes those glissandos. And I've played the solo piano version, not well, but I've played it. And, you know, in the piano version, you hear this very clearly, of course, because everything is on the same plane of timbre. And so those glissandos are just as important as the melody. But in a big orchestra, and you've got, you know, it's not a big orchestra, but it's a sizable orchestra with a fullish string section, and you've also got a forte suspended cymbal roll going on behind the whole thing, and the glockenspiel's clanking along, and the horns and winds are playing, and the timpani are pounding. You almost never hear the harp the way you're supposed to, and so those glissandos go for nothing. Now, if you don't know they're there, it really doesn't matter, does it? But if you do know they're there, you want to hear them. And I'm telling you now, they're there. So now you will never be satisfied if you don't hear them. Well, depending on the performance, obviously. But let's talk now about the 5 versions of the complete ballet that I think are the best ones. Whether or not you hear the glissandos, whether or not the tam-tam is ideal, these are the ones that are worth having. First, André Cluiton with the Paris Conservatory Orchestra, one of the greatest things they ever did, one of the greatest things he ever did. Their Ravel cycle was sort of the last glorious moment for that orchestra, because a few years afterwards, it got absorbed into the new Orchestre de Paris and was disbanded. And a whole amazing tradition of orchestral playing going back to Beethoven to the 1820s. And the tradition of playing in the Paris Conservatory was gone. And so this is a cycle to hear for both artistic and historical reasons. It's superb in every way, and the Mother Goose suite is absolutely enchanting and delightful. Not suite, the whole ballet. Sorry about that. You know what I mean. Now, Pierre Boulez also had a special feeling for this music. Heaven knows why, but he did. And he recorded it twice. The first time was with the New York Philharmonic. Excellent performance, beautifully played. Tam-tam, nah, not so much. Harp, not really. But it's a terrific performance in every respect. It's very, very, it captures that fairy tale quality, that magical sonority that you want. A lot of it has to do with the nice horn playing and the interludes in this performance. But that's a really good one. However, he remade it with the Berlin Philharmonic on Deutsche Grammophon, and I got to tell you, you will never hear more beautiful playing than that of the Berlin Philharmonic on this recording. It's so seductive, it's so exquisite. It really is just a remarkable performance, and a fabulous example of a great orchestra playing with all the care and love of which it's capable. So this is a tremendous performance. Just as a musical event, it's incredible. It's glorious. Now, the other great version for me is Ozawa's with the Boston Symphony. This is a wonderful cycle of Ravel. It's always been downplayed and sort of dismissed, but it really is fabulous. I mean, the Boston Symphony was an unparalleled orchestra in French music due to its own history and tradition of playing this music with its various French music directors. And Ozawa was a terrific conductor in French music, and his Mother Goose also has atmosphere. It has a magical atmosphere like nobody else. And the Fairy Garden, although you don't hear the harp at the end because the climax is so big, is just gorgeous. The last chord of that Fairy Garden is one of the most sumptuous, beautiful sounds you will ever hear emanating from your speakers. And he also has a really good tam-tam in La Ronette. It's a big one, it's a heavy one, but it has the right sound, and he gets them to play it correctly, and you can really tell the difference. But my favorite version, the one that gets everything right, all the different points, and really lets you hear the music the way Ravel intended, in my view, and that gives you the best conception of the entire piece, is Jean Martinon. You know, Martinon was just such a great conductor, and his Ravel cycle was and his Debussy cycle, which are both in this box, which is now on Warner. It says EMI, of course, was just spectacular. This was made, after he left Chicago and went back to France. And I always laugh when I see, Martinon originally was recording for Decca in the 1950s, and then he went to Chicago, remember, and made a few records for RCA, and then he went back to France and then recorded for Irato and EMI virtually the entire French orchestral repertoire, plus Prokofiev cycle, which unfortunately wasn't terribly well recorded, but would have been very good if you could hear it better. Anyway, I remember reading in liner notes for one of the Decca releases, they talk about Martinon, and they say, well, he recorded for Decca in the 50s, and then after his unsuccessful tenure in Chicago, he returned to France, and we're not really sure what happened to him. Well, that was when he made all of his recordings that matter. That was his legacy. And these Ravel performances, like the Debussy performances, are outstanding. And the most outstanding of the Ravel performances is Martinon's version of the Mother Goose Ballet, the complete ballet, which you absolutely must hear if you want to hear exactly what Ravel wrote when he penned this magical, magical score. So keep on listening, folks. Thank you very much.